Hello, Terry Caliendo of Dedicated Managers here again, and in this video I want to talk about Firebase. So again, I'm creating a real-time database. This is my prototype here for the client, for foster kinship, and I've talked a lot about all the different pieces, and now I kind of want to talk about the back end, the database, and how the data gets loaded. So that happens here in main.js. Again, it all starts from main.js. So this is where we import all our different pieces that make the application work. And so here's where I import Firebase and all its different components. So I'm importing the main Firebase. I hate that hover stuff. I'm sorry. This is the main Firebase app here, and then I tell it which components I need. So I want to do authorization. That's where I get my sign-in stuff. And then this is where I load the database and the Firestore. I'm not using the database right now. I need to take that out. I'm actually using the Firestore right now. So that's what I'm using there, and that gets loaded into this Firebase object that I can make calls on. So we load the Firebase stuff up into the project. And then here is my config parameters, and I get those from Firebase here. So I'm blanking on where to get it from. If we go into the app here and we want to add it to the store, they give us the config variables. Again, you can stick this in your application as just a piece right here, or you can do a whole Webpack thing. And so then I just need to copy this part and then tell my development environment to, instead of call the Firebase code from Google's servers, I'm just going to put it in my application and load it right with my application. So that's what this does here. Puts it into my application. This is the configurations that tells it what database to work with, what the domain is that it can work with, the project. That's all that stuff ties this configuration back to the Firebase Firestore. And then so we initialize the app with the config parameters. And then I think I talked about this earlier in another video, that this is a new thing that you just need to stick in there so that the Firestore knows that it's using the latest version and doesn't break your code. So let's kind of talk about making a call. We can start with the application, or with the login logic. So login deals with the authentication piece. So I guess in this video I'm gonna talk about authentication, and then I'll move on to Firestore in the next one. So authentication starts with the login view, and that's you'll see right here on the sign in page. So sign in on my H1 tag, here's my sign in. And when I click sign in, what happens? So here's that sign in button, and I say when the click happens, call this sign in function, which happens to be down here. And the sign in function actually calls the Vue storage and says, hey, run something that causes the user to log in. So if we go and look at the Vue store, which I don't think I made a video on yet, I might go back, or I could just talk about it here. The Vue store is kind of like a global thing. Rather than putting all this login logic in that single component, I put it in the storage so it can be accessed globally from any of my components should I need it. This I really don't need, accessible from everywhere, but if I wanted to put my login, in a different space, I could easily do that and then just keep the code separated, or the login logic separated. So when that code is called, it dispatches this action, which is an asynchronous call to the Firebase object. If you recall, so I created this Firebase object back in my main object. It's now available globally as long as I tell my JavaScript or the Webpack application to, hey, I want to relate Firebase back to my main app through this Firebase object. So I've got the Firebase object, and then I'm going to call auth on it, and then I'm going to ask it to sign in with email. So I'm going to send it the credentials, the username and password, and that was sent from the login. So when I dispatched the call to the login parameter, the global login, it's asynchronous call, I'm going to send the username object, username password object, this object here with the username and password from this this model up here. So send that along over to the store. This receives it. It receives it as a object's credential, a credentials object, and then sends it to the Firebase code, which will reach out to the Firebase servers. And Firebase does all this work for us. We don't have to even think. It's all done on the back end. The WebSockets are set up so that it can communicate back and forth with its servers. We don't have to do any of that. It's just all done for us, and we just have to send it just call this method with the username and password that we sent in, and then it sends us a promise object, which is an asynchronous call. So it goes and does its work, and then when it gets done, it calls this then function and throws the return data in there. So when it's done, I just console that, hey, we've logged in and I want to redirect to the dashboard. And if we fail, I want to alert with a failure message and tell the people what the message were. Now this is rudimentary code. I can make this look prettier, but let's just say I log in and I put a bad password in. So it reached out to the server and came back and gave me this this error message: the password is invalid, or the user does not have a password. And that's this code call right here. Reaching out to the server and coming back and showing the message as an alert that pops up. So now let's load the right username and password, and we'll see that after I click sign in, it's going to go do its call, and then it's going to redirect us to the dashboard after it finishes its promise, after it finishes its call. So I click sign in, it does its work, and then it redirects us to the dashboard, and that's what happened here. I clicked sign in, it did its work, it passed those parameters, and redirected us to the dashboard. So real simple, it does all the work for us, and then we can kind of handle the users on the back end. Here's the authentication object database on the back end, and you can do all kinds of different stuff with your sign-in methods. Right now I'm just doing a very simple email and password sign-in. You'll notice I don't have a sign-up form because my application is not going to be open to the public. I am going to just create the users here in this database here, and it's just as simple as adding a user and their email address, so bob@bob.com, and giving him a password of Bob's password. I don't know if that'll work. We'll see if it works. So there it is. It's stored with his password as a hash. And now I can go back to my my project, and I can go with bob@bob.com if I did this right, and put in Bob's password. And again, this is a Vuetify thing where I can actually see the password. I think I did that right. And now I sign in. And it redirected me. So just creating a user was just as simple as that. Just going to the Firebase authentication area and just creating a new user for that person to get authenticated against. And you can really start to get into permissions with all this stuff on your database, and as far as securing what each person can do. It's very granular, but I'm just using it very high level right now as far as logging in. So that's a first overview of the, just making a simple call to the authentication. The user is now authenticated, and getting back to the router. The router actually lets me create this meta component so that I can not allow access to various pages unless they are authenticated, and that comes back to this router. So before any call to a different route to change the page, so when the person clicks here, before the actual route is called and shown, it actually runs this function, which lets me check, hey, is the user able to see this based on this functionality here. So basically, if the user requires authorization, which is based on some logic that I do up here, and there is no current user, redirect them to the login page. So they're not logged in, redirect them to the login page. If the user just logged in and they're trying to view the login page, there's no point in viewing the login page. Redirect them to the dashboard. Or anything else will allow them to see the page because they passed all the other tests. So that's how we protect the pages with the router component as far as that goes. So in the next video, I'll talk about get past authentication, and I will get into the last component, and that is working with the database as far as how the data gets passed to and from the application to the database.